Mm. Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to, a special episode. Today, we're going to be going over an interesting topic, which is basically the idea of how you go about creating a character. How do you go about planning a build? How do you come up with the ideas for making amazing characters? Granted, you can always go online and just simply look up somebody else's build, but where's the fun in that? So what I like to do is I like to follow a specific process. And instead of telling you guys how to build a character, I'm just going to tell you guys how I plan a build. All right. So this video is how GGM plans a build. I'm talking about myself in the third person. Now, when it comes to planning a build, there are some very specific things that you have to think about. First off is what character are you going to pick? What skill are you going to use? What character build are you going to be? And I don't like to think about it that way. I don't want to go into things and be like, okay, I want to be a Hammerden, or all right, well, I want to be a melee Zeal Paladin, or something like that. What I like to do is one of two things. I like to choose between one of two options. Number one is buy the skill. All right, so this is an interesting way to build a character, and it's actually kind of very fun. So what you do is you choose a specific skill. Like for instance, if I wanted to build a specific druid, I might say, okay, well, I want to be a Fireclaw druid. I want to use the Fireclaw skill. And then at that point, I can then make my decisions on how I would like to build a Fireclaw druid. Do I want to build a bear Fireclaw druid? Do I want to build a werewolf Fireclaw druid? Do I want to make him two-handed? Do I want to make him one-handed? And so forth and so on. And every choice that I make invariably comes back to that answer, or that question with the answer, which is what skill do I want to focus my character on? And in this particular case, it would be Fire Claws, or maybe I want to focus on Frozen Orb, or maybe I want to focus on Nova. It doesn't really matter. If you choose the skill that you want to build your character around, usually the rest starts to fall into place. Another way that you can build your character, that I actually do more often than by the skill, is by the item. So you can pick a very specific item within the game. Like, for instance, the Stormlash Scourge. I decided that I wanted to build a character around two items. I wanted to build a character around the Windhammer Ogre Mole, and I wanted to build a character around the Stormlash Scourge. And so I set out to achieve that goal. I was able to create what I call a Wind Wolf. And he utilizes the synergy bonuses from his elemental skills to increase the damage output from the procced effects, like the Tornado on the Stormlash and the Windhammer Twister, which is level 22, so that as I'm attacking with my melee abilities, I'm spamming these effects. And this is what you call building a character by an item. There are tons and tons of items within the game that you can build characters around. Dragon armor, Hand of Justice bow, Dream helmet and Dream shield, the the ice bow. There are just so many different choices that you can make, like the brand bow, the bone armor, the rain armor, and so forth and so on. And you can literally just take one of these pieces of equipment and go, okay, I want my character to use this as his focal piece. And then everything that you do sort of comes out of that choice, the same way that you can choose a skill. And I can show you many characters that I've chosen by the skill. So, for instance, my Freezing Arrow Amazon is definitely a by the skill character. I chose at the beginning of the ladder to build specifically a Freezing Arrow Amazon. I said she is going to use Freezing Arrow, and she is going to focus completely on making that Freezing Arrow the best damage ability that she has, not splitting her attention between other abilities. I did the same thing for the North Star Paladin. The North Star Paladin was conceived as a pure smiter. And this character only had any intention of being a pure smiter. However, as you go forward, with your characters, what happens is you learn more about the character as you build it. And you ask yourself very specific questions. You say, what is my primary skill? And by figuring out what your primary skill is, you will understand better how you're going to make this character work, right? So in this particular case, with my North Star Smiter, my primary skill is Smite. All right, and at that point, you have to think about what are the strengths of this particular ability. Well, Smite is an absolutely excellent single target ability. It hits very fast. It procs effects nicely, but it has problems. Right? What are the weaknesses of my ability? Which is another very important thing. So you have to ask yourself that question as well. What are the weaknesses of my ability? And this gives you a interesting alternative thought process. And this is important to the build process because what it does is it creates a opportunity for you to fix those weaknesses. So let's outline the weaknesses of Smite, shall we? Let's do a quick outline. What are the weaknesses of Smite? It is a single target attack only, which is a big weakness in high density groups. When you are fighting multiple monsters, a single target attack is a detriment because you have to single hit every single target, right? It is physical damage only, which is a detriment as well because it requires you to break physical damage immunities, which means that majority of the time when you come across a physical immune monster, unless you have accounted for that physical immunity, like for instance with amplified damage or something similar, you're not going to be able to break that resistance. And you're not going to be able to kill that monster. And then the last, but most glaring issue with Smite is its lifesteal and mana steal. Its lack of life and mana steal. So you have to solve these issues, okay? So you recognize the weaknesses of the ability. And you find, okay, well, maybe I will add in a secondary ability which covers the weaknesses of the first. And the North Star Smiter is the epitome of that. He is basically a character that is a pure smiter through and through. But he also has Fist of the Heavens, which allows him to density clear. He has Holy Bolt, which allows him to hit targets that are really far away because he's a melee character. So if there's a monster that's floating over an abyss, I can kill him. I also have a optional item which allows me to spam 500 damage holy bolts at 2000 damage per second with the principal armor, which allows me to apply a secondary damage type to smite so that I have the holy bolts firing. This allows my physical damage only skill to offer a secondary damage type, and this is absolutely great. Now the problem with this though is that I still don't have lifesteal, right? So I have to find a way to get myself some kind of lifesteal, which is where the Dracula's Grasp comes in, which allows me to have a way to steal back my life. However, it's not really enough because the problem with Smite is that if you're not hitting something, your life is just constantly draining away because you have basically no way to restore your life. And if you come into a case where you have physical immune monsters, again, life tap will not be useful. So I ended up going with an Insight Merc, specifically for this character, with a double regen build on Prayer. And this is just a way that I was able to fix the weaknesses of the specific skills that I chose. So I chose Smite as my main ability, and then I utilized Fist of the Heavens and Holy Bolt to overcome many of the deficiencies. I also utilized the Insight/Prayer Aura to overcome the negative, the constant draining HP, and so forth and so on. And as this character has been built, his strengths from Smite, which is the single target damage, the exceptionally fast kill speed on single targets. I can literally kill Uber Diablo in 10 seconds. But he covers the weaknesses with other things. And that's one of the things that you have to remember about this particular, like planning out your character, is think about what build you're choosing. what skill you're choosing, and then find a way to cover those weaknesses. Another thing that you have to think about is the element that you're focusing on. So what element specifically am I focusing on? In the case of North Star, he has a physical damage attack, and he also has a magic damage Holy Bolt. In the case of Frosty Cheeks, he is entirely cold damage because he is Holy Freeze. So in this particular case, you are relying on that cold damage above all else, and so you have to take advantage of that in as many forms as you can, like negative resistance, cold sunder, and whatever other way that you can take advantage of it, like lower resistance or conviction. And thinking about what element your damage type is very important, because things like amplify damage or decrepify can come in very handy for a physical damage character. But if you're mainly an elemental damage character like Frosty Cheeks is, that doesn't really help you out very much, because Frosty Cheeks is dealing primarily elemental damage. So amplify damage and decrepify are all but useless to him, except for with the slow effect on decrepify. The next question that you have to ask yourself is, what equipment helps my build the best? All right, this is kind of an odd one, and a lot of people don't really think about this because they just kind of throw on whatever the hell they want. Like, for instance, I see Tesladins running Grief, or, I see characters that are primarily, fire damage, running a weapon that doesn't help them out at all. And the thing is that you have to focus on what equipment helps your build the best. If you're a lightning sorceress, for instance, Crescent Moon is an incredibly cheap, incredibly powerful negative 35% enemy lightning resistance, which can be put on sorceresses, and has a huge damage effect on her output. Whereas, similarly, a Tesladin could use either a Grief or a Crescent Moon, but in the Sunder Charm day and age, negative resistance is far more powerful than Grief will ever be in that particular build, because not only does it affect your single target damage, it also affects your AoE damage output, whereas Grief is only adding single target damage to your build. And that negative 35% enemy lightning resistance is absolutely huge in terms of the Tesladin output. Another very interesting question that you have to ask yourself is, what mercenary helps my build the best? This is a question that used to, before 2.4, it used to pretty much always be the same answer. It was the Act 2 mercenary, unless you were using a Fanaticism bow on an Act 1 Merc, and there really wasn't much other options in the game. However, nowadays the options have actually diversified quite a lot. And we have very nice Act 1 Mercs, very nice Act 2 Mercs. We have very nice Act 3 Mercs now, which is pretty surprising, and even extremely good Act 5 Frenzy Mercs. And utilizing the best Merc for your specific situation can have a huge bonus on your kill speed and your overall survivability. And in this particular case, my character is the Godzilla. He is a Dream / Holy Bolt spamming Paladin. And he focuses primarily on elemental damage. So I would either use Crescent Moon,
I'll put that to good use,
or Plague, depending on how I felt that particular moment, although Crescent Moon is definitely the higher damage output. Now, in this particular case, for my mercenary, I chose a Act 3 mercenary. And the reason why is because I have freaking level 24 conviction, which should be level 25, but I'm probably missing some equipment. And with negative 150% to enemy resistance, why not take advantage of the fact that I'm stripping the resistances away from just about every monster that I encounter? And when it comes to the mercenary, I was able to obtain a very high 407% enchant, which helps my attack rating immensely. And also the damage output that he's capable of is actually pretty crazy. In my experience, in combination with the 3.1k fireball and the negative 150% resistance, combined with the negative 15% that he has on him from running the flickering flame, I would notice that he can literally just obliterate things even in P8, which is pretty impressive. But it's about taking advantage of what your character is good for. So, like if you're a physical damage character, you would probably be using something like a Reaper's Toll for Decrepify procs. If you are an elemental damage character, maybe you burn mana a lot, you might be using something like a Meditation Polearm. But the Meditation Polearm, I will caution everybody, is definitely something that you usually want to avoid if you can. And I'm going to give you guys a really quick answer as to why you should avoid it. There are better options. Most elemental damage characters, with the exception of the Cold Sorceress, would get far better use out of something like Infinity, for instance, or even a Plague Sword, which has lower resistance procs on it. In general, if you can avoid something like Infinity, you probably should build around it. In my specific case, with my Freezing Arrow Amazon, she has a huge mana cost, 19 mana cost per shot. It's absolutely insane. And the best mercenary for my build for a long time was the Meditation Polearm Merc. However, I managed to wean myself away from that by building toward a workaround to that weakness. For instance, I have 3% Mana Steel gloves now. I have a very nice 6% Mana Steel ring, and I have a very nice 7% Mana Steel amulet. Combined with the Silkweave boots with plus 5 mana after each kill, gives me a very healthy 16% Mana Steel with plus 7 mana after each kill. And when I go into combat and I actually fight monsters, what you'll notice is that my mana doesn't go down. I don't need the Insight Mercenary anymore. Because I have countered that. But as you can see, if I just simply fire my bow off into nothingness, you'd watch my mana just chunk down. I mean, just absolutely crazy, right? But as soon as I get into combat and I actually start hitting things, I can sustain because I have compensated for the loss of my Meditation Polearm Merc. And anybody can compensate just about for the loss of the Meditation Polearm Merc. There are very few classes in the game, very few, where I would say that the Meditation Polearm Merc is the optimal item. And that's fine. Because in those builds, just like with my Dream Paladin, who is using a Fire Merc, or my Freezing Arrows on, who is using a Plague Merc here, the optimal Merc for your specific build might specifically be a Meditation Polearm Merc. Maybe you're a Cold Sorceress. Maybe you don't get good use out of an Infinity. Maybe you don't get good use out of a lot of things. And the Meditation is just the best option for you because you can optimize your damage output without having to worry about your mana cost. And that's kind of what this whole section is about. This whole section was about which mercenary is the best for you, right? Which mercenary is the best for your specific build. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I haven't gone over. We talked about building a character by an item, building a character by a skill. We talked about making sure that your primary skill is, of course, your primary skill, and determining what the weaknesses of that primary skill are, the weaknesses of your character. What element are you focusing on? We talked about that, so you have to think about that kind of thing. What element am I focusing on? Am I spreading myself too thin across multiple elements? In which case, with the new Sunders, a lot of the times you're better off focusing your damage in one particular element and going for negative resistance, as opposed to spreading it out over multiple categories. We talked about what equipment best supports your build. You have to think about that kind of thing. And that's exactly what I just went over with this particular Amazon. I needed lifesteal. So specific pieces of equipment that would make my build stronger were what I sought out and eventually consumed. And once I had those specific pieces of equipment to make my build stronger, as you can see, I was able to wean myself off things that I didn't need, like Meditation Polearms. We talked about which mercenary best supports your build, which is something that you're going to have to think about in depth. You're going to have to sit there for a little while and mull it over. the choices are not always clear, and they're also not always easy. Sometimes on a necromancer, for instance, you might be better off utilizing something like an enchant merc for the massive attack rating increase and the additional fire damage, or maybe you would be better off with an infinity merc later on down the road for the negative defense to increase their damage per hit. But each individual moment, when you start to get your character higher and higher, you're going to have different choices. Like I said, my character was originally using a meditation polearm, but now that I can wean myself away from that, now that I was able to bring myself away from the meditation polearm, now I can utilize other more powerful mercenaries to my advantage. The freezing arrow Amazon, for instance, has issues with single target damage. She's absolutely excellent at multi-target density, but has issues with single target, which is where my beautiful barbarian mercenary comes in, because he's very good at single target damage and can help me chunk down those monsters very quickly. The other answer is the other thing that was going over is, how do you compensate for your weaknesses? This is a very important one, and you have to make sure that you're thinking about this when it comes to builds. And we went over this in detail, so I'm just going to cover it briefly. But if you don't think about the weaknesses of your build and compensate for them in some way, whether it's a mercenary helping you out with AoE damage, whether it's using an alternative skill, like for instance with my North Star Smiter, who utilizes Fist of the Heavens to compensate for the fact that Smite just doesn't have the density clearing capability. But at the same time, Fist of the Heavens doesn't have the single target damage output that Smite does. So they complement each other very nicely. And if you think about it in this way, you will more often be able to build characters that are well balanced and actually useful. Over my time, I have built tons of characters. In fact, if we go over that real quick, I'd like to just briefly show you some of the characters that I've built. I have Sonic, which was a throwing barb. So I wanted to build a double throw barb, and I did. Ardor is a energy shield firewall sorceress. Leader is a summon druid. Proliferate is just a mule. Tankazon is specifically a character designed to be as tanky as she possibly could be. Convictor is a vengeance paladin. Naked Mancer is a summon necromancer. We have Jean Grey right here, which is a Phoenix assassin. That was my goal with her. I also have a shield barbarian. He's not wearing a shield at the moment. This is an exploding arrow Amazon. I specifically designed her to be exploding arrow Amazon. I have a Blade Fury assassin. This is a melee spearzon. She's using a very nice Breath of the Dying Ghost spear. I have North Star Paladin. Obviously, North Star is my North Star Smiter. He's missing his torch, so all his equipment got taken off. Frosty Cheeks is my Holy Freeze Paladin, which I'm still building. Sapphire is a very interesting passive Amazon who utilizes no equipment or no skills in anything other than passives. She's actually quite an interesting look because it's a very good demonstration in covering your weaknesses. So this particular character is built entirely around the idea of just the most massive amount of passive skills that you can possibly have, which makes her extremely tanky because she has all the dodges. Makes sure that she is having a really strong Valkyrie. In fact, her Valkyrie is much higher than this normally. She's missing quite a bit of her equipment. I believe she was able to get it to level 48 when she was in her heyday. And the Valkyrie could literally kill like Ubers by herself. That's how stupid she was. But the problem with this particular character, the weakness of this particular character, is she had nothing else to do. So I set her up with alternative abilities. She has a Mage Wrath because it has Guided Arrow, just so that she can fire guided arrows at the targets and dish out damage while the Valkyrie is doing her thing. She also has Titan's Revenge and the Thunder God's Vigor, which gives her Lightning Fury, which allows her to dish out damage in that way as well. So just to give you an idea here, like if I cast my Valkyrie and hop over here to the Frid Highlands, you would think that level 11 Lightning Fury wouldn't even be really that good, right? But you'd be wrong, because it actually does pretty darn good on a character that is that is primarily a passives on. And while I'm waiting for my my Valkyrie to come over here and whoop Eldrit's butt, What I was doing was I compensated for the weaknesses of not having anything to do. I realized that the passives on was my goal, but I wanted to have something to do while I was waiting for my Valkyrie to kill things. And ironically, having the Lightning Fury on my offhand and Guided Arrow on my other was the perfect option because it allowed me to have a fairly nice single target capability where I could pick out a single target. Like, for instance, this guy right here. I'll just pick him out and kill him. Or, when I come across a large group, take out the large group. And this allowed me to actually be an active participant instead of just standing there watching my Valkyrie do her work. I don't think there's much more to go over when it comes to this. And if you guys have any questions, I would be happy to answer whatever questions you have. If you have a build that you're trying to work out and you'd like some help working out the build, I'll be glad to give you a hand. I don't really care what builds you want to make. I'm never going to put anybody down for trying to make something work. Like if you want to make a freaking Inferno Sorceress or an Arctic Blast Druid, guess what? I will help you make it. I will help you figure out the most optimal form for that particular build. I really don't care. I like putting my mind to puzzles, and that's what I like. That's literally my build process in a nutshell. Is I present myself with a choice, which creates a puzzle beneath it. Like if I were to say right now that I wanted to build myself an Inferno Sorceress, my mind would go to work on how I could create the most awesome Inferno Sorceress that ever existed. I would think about the weaknesses of the ability, that it makes you stand still. I would figure out what I needed to do to make myself survive while I'm standing still. I'm assuming that I would have to make myself tanky. Maybe Energy Shield would be a good choice with Inferno. Maybe I could add in a secondary skill like Firewall, so that the firewall would be right in front of me while the monster is trying to attack me. He could be standing in the firewall while I'm also burning him with the Inferno. And there's 100 different things and ways that things could work out and how you could configure your equipment to get things perfect. But at the end of the day, that's the fun, right? The fun is in figuring out the solution, which is why you don't often see me do build videos, because I like to help you guys come up with interesting ideas on your own and not so much just give you the answer. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when I'm just ranting for 27 minutes on how I like to plan my characters out. And as always, keep watching.